All of Ezekiel in one podcast. That's my job. I'm Kendall Brian Hunter, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. Microwave breakfast burritos. Clear in the back. Someday I'll just start throwing it behind my head, but, Halloween in 3 days. Still some more pumpkin spice. No, I'm not going to throw it. It'll make a mess. You've got another month of pumpkin spice, and it gets kind of tacky doing pumpkin spice during Christmas. But this is not a cooking show. This is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I'm talking about the book of Ezekiel. So this breaks down, what is it? I think I have 7 points on this. So let me just stop chatting about food, and let's get into Ezekiel, although food does come up a little bit later. So the first section is the first 3 chapters of Ezekiel, and he describes this vision where you see wheels, you see these angelic beings, the cherubim. They're later described, and I think it's in chapter 10. He has a vision of the Lord himself, which is a typical vision with Isaiah and Joseph Smith, and also with other prophets had that vision. Sorry, I'm going to adjust that. I got a electric bill came up, so I had to pay that before I got on, so I'm a little bit discombobulated, but I think as we get going, all things will smooth out. So Ekphrasis, that's the written description of an art object. Think about this. How would you describe the Mona Lisa in words? And you realize that just would not do justice. And it's the same thing when Ezekiel sees or other prophets have these visions. It's like they write it down, but just you need the visual component to it. So that's why the book of Abraham is so handy. It has illustrations with it. Still off topic. Okay, let's get back down. So he has the visions. He has the issuing of the call, the explanation of what he has to do. He has a section on where Ezekiel eats a scroll. That's a little bit strange, but you understand the symbolism. It's also one that happens to the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 15, and also the book of Revelation to John the Revelator in chapter 10. I have in the comments section, I have a bunch of notes to this where I'll give better references to that, so you can double check what I'm saying. So that's the issuing of the call. And then the next thing is we're skipping over a bunch of chapters. Some of it's repetitive. If you want to read it, nothing's stopping you from reading it. But for some people, I have to admit that reading the Old Testament's a bit of a challenge, and this helps ease you into it. So we're not force-feeding you a bunch of stuff, and we're hitting the high points. So, and that's actually more productive and more effective than force-feeding everyone. So warning voice, chapters 33 and 34. Duty to warn, as the Doctrine and Covenants says in section 88, verse 81, we all have a duty to warn. And in fact, President Joseph Fielding Smith took that a little bit further. Once you just hear the message, you're under an obligation to warn, even if you don't accept that. So for a person who hears the message who doesn't join the church, they're still under an obligation to warn people. And I provide references for that in the notes section. Like I said, I always come prepared, and we never take roll. Another thing to keep in mind is that we will be held accountable for the things we do. So if we monkey around in the church, or if we're negligent, that's going to come back to you. You know, people who forget to return phone calls or return tweets, or hang up on your elders quorum president when he wants to ask about ministering. There's going to be a delay. These avoidance tactics and defense mechanisms, they'll come back to haunt us. And no, this is not a scare tactic. I'm not scary. So held accountable. Let's see. In 33 verse 11, here it is right in front of me. That's what was throwing me off. Like I said, as you get ready to broadcast, some things came up. So here we go. And 33 verse 11 says, "As I live, saith the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked should turn from his way and live. Turn ye from your evil ways, for why will ye die, O house of Israel?" Kind of reminds us of a hymn, and I won't spoil it for you, so you get to look that up. That contrasts with how atheists sometimes present God, where he's flinging people to hell, or there's no due process and God wants to punish people. Yeah, some people get off on that. They just really into God punishing people, and that's not an accurate description of God. God's a God of love. Of course, being a loving person doesn't mean being an enabler, and doesn't mean that mercy robs justice. But no, he's not a sadist. Another thing in chapter 33 is the end of the chapter has these verses 30, 31, and 32, where it talks about people showing up to hear the prophet, and they hear his words, but they don't take his actions. I think we're going to get this later on in one of the minor prophets, where he talks about So if you're listening to the sing-song voice of a prophet where it sounds like a beautiful instrument, but they just don't pay attention, that's one of the dangers of having a favorite general authority. So you listen to the charismatic general authority, you hear the message, you get kind of giggles and goose pimples, but are you a changed person? Was this just a form of entertainment as opposed to hearing a prophet speak to you? Yeah, Ezekiel isn't pulling any punches. Like I said, some of the concerns that atheists raise against people of faith, yeah, they're actually valid concerns, and we do need to address them. But there's also some honest distortions about what goes on, and the prophets don't hold back on criticizing people, although that's a little bit of the dilemma. So when the prophets speak soft words, you get the warm fuzzies, and but when he starts talking about hard words, you cry fallen prophet. Talk about that in the book of Helaman. But Helaman, that's a couple years from now. So the sing-song sermons, and then actually, that kind of segues into a little bit something they talk about also in chapter 34, and it's about the church gluttons. Is that 33 and 34 sort of bookends about the voice of warning, and then also people who are not doing the work of the church. Is that people who show up to church, and church is just a country club for them. It's a block party where you hang out, and as opposed to saying we're here to help people. We're here not to throw parties for ourselves. This reminds me a little bit of something that happened when I was in a student ward, as the bishop said, okay, we want to have a pancake breakfast before General Conference. So Bishop and the bishopric organized this, and they had a grill prot there, and everyone was cooking pancakes before conference. And I was watching the clock, and things kept going, and we're having breakfast, and I had my fill, and people were still coming. People have different sleep schedules. They get up at time. Some, like I said, some people just don't like breakfast. Some people skip it. So what happens? We had the breakfast, and I was watching, and soon it hit 10 o'clock, time for General Conference to start, and people were sitting out there and just still chatting and having breakfast. That's exactly what Ezekiel's talking about. We're having parties. We're more concerned about snacks and organizing a party than paying attention to the prophet and changing our lives and ministering people, that we're just glutting ourselves on the church budget and really not doing what we should be doing. We're hijacking the church and misusing and abusing the church, and people are suffering, and that's one of Ezekiel's messages. So the other thing, too, is about the... you hear in 34 verse 16, I'll seek that which is lost and bring again that which was driven away, and will bind up that which was broken, and will strengthen that which was sick, but I'll destroy the fat, the strong, and I'll feed them with judgment. So we're taking word budgets and holding these great catered lunches for ourselves, but God says, yeah, you're neglecting what you're doing, and while you're eating your filet mignon on the church nickel, what's going to happen? I'm going to be feeding you judgment, because that's not what you're supposed to be doing with the church. You're supposed to be doing the work of the church and not turning into a block party or a country club. Later on, they talk about the covenant of peace, and that's one of the themes with Jeremiah and with Ezekiel, and with Isaiah is always talking about covenant love, which is chesed. President Nelson talks about it. I hope we're not losing. As you repeat something, we sometimes tune it out, it becomes background noise, and we just start chanting a talking point. Once again, the sing-song sermon, but making sure that that's sinking in, that you're not showing up the church, taking the sacrament, and just running home. Hey, yeah, I just took the sacrament. Like I said, I took the sacrament and duck out of the rest of church. No, that's not covenant living. So 37, that is a fun chapter. Sometimes people use it a lot as missionaries. It's two things in 37, the resurrection, the valley of dry bones, and then the stick of Judah and the stick of Ephraim. So pay attention to what Ezekiel has to say. And there's this, I put a link to this about what Zeke Johnson, who was out plowing a field and saw this young Indian girl resurrect, and pay more attention to the scriptures and sort of the stuff that floats around the church, these Xerox copies. The prophets authorized, the stuff has been vetted, and it's gone through a prophet. You can trace it back to someone who holds priesthood keys as opposed to a faith-promoting rumor. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's pay attention to the type of information you have. Another thing to keep in mind, okay, this is shifting to the stick of Ephraim, as in Doctrine and Covenants section 27, verse 5. Doctrine and Covenants 27, verse 5. The Book of Mormon isn't the stick of Ephraim. It's the record of the stick of Ephraim. we hear things, but when we read something, we kind of blot it out. I know some people are better listeners, and that's why they like audiobooks and podcasts. I prefer reading, and you have to pay attention to what you're reading. And as stuff gets relayed, we don't. Information gets a little bit garbled. Book of Mormon is not the stick of Ephraim; it's the record of the stick of Ephraim. And so we're talking about the sticks are people, not books. So I'm going to throw a freebie in here. This is not part of the reading lesson, but we did talk about the duty to warn. Chapters 38 and 39 talk about the battle of Gog and Magog. And as Joseph Smith explained in Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, that's page 280. That'll happen at the end of the millennium. So you have Armageddon at the beginning of the millennium, and then you have a small season where the devil's loosed out, and then you have the battle of Gog and Magog at the end, as Joseph Smith explained. And Joseph Smith saw a vision of these battles, and in fact, it was so horrific that he asked God to seal it up, and he had to get the vision incrementally. It's the same thing that happened with Nephi, and when he saw the vision of the destructions of the Nephites and the Lamanites, that it got intense. Brother fighting brother, people seeking each other's blood, and that's why you don't hear me talk about, hey, I'm optimistic about the future. No, these Armageddon and Gog and Magog, these are all real battles. And you need to take these to heart and understand some of the sequences as best you can and realize, yeah, this is going to happen. So do your food storage and stop horsing around. I mean, you think about all the stuff that's happening, the resurrection and the battle of Gog and Magog, and you have the church gluttons that some of the things we're doing in the church actually prevents us from being good disciples, that we're just abusing what's going on here. So here we are. Next, the last section is 47. It's with the restoration of the temple and then the waters that come out of the temple about healing. My understanding, yeah, this would be a literal water. From what I understand, there was a real well of water associated with the Jewish temple, and that's where you use it for the lathers and the other ritual washings. Although I'm doing that off the top of my head. The Nauvoo temple also had a well for the baptismal font there, but healing from the temple, healing of the Dead Sea. That's what's going to happen during the millennium, is the earth will be renewed and receive its paradisiacal glory. Ezekiel talks about it, and we need to prepare for it. So that's the Ezekiel, 12 minutes. But what'd you expect when you tried to cover one of the major prophets in one sitting? So let's get to the Christ quotient. So how does this reading assignment bring us to Jesus Christ? Well, it's the topics you covered. God himself, God himself leads us to Christ. Christ leads us to the Father. Prophets lead us to Christ. The voice of warning leads us to Christ. The local leadership, what we do with the church, and do we hijack it? Are we gluttons? Are we actually doing what we should be doing with church meetings? Having covenants, the covenant of peace, ministering to other people. The resurrection leads us to Christ. The Book of Mormon, the record of the stick of Ephraim, the gathering of Israel. And being honest about the calamities that are coming is also part of this. Temples lead us to Christ. And that is the point. 13:12.